what I'm going to do is talk about a kind of pivot that I've been involved in for the last couple of years, where I am really applying some of the work I've done on transformation to this concept of aging, and in particular, bringing together the kind of awareness aspects of aging that we're learning about through consciousness. And just to start by saying that we are in the midst of a revolution, and it is an aging revolution. We're now growing those people who are 55 and older at a rapid pace. It is leading to all kinds of both challenges and opportunities. It comes with a tremendous amount of bias and prejudice around, what does it mean to grow old? Is it a failure that, many in sort of the industrial world would configure aging as? We talk about the silver tsunami, which is poetic, but also very pejorative. And so it's time for us to really look at, what is happening with aging. Do you guys see my little, there, move that over. And just again to say, people all over the world are living longer and healthier, and that there really isn't a path for this new phase. As we enter our third act, we haven't really gotten our bearings. And, we think about, as you reach 65, you retire, but more and more people aren't retiring. More and more people are wanting to stay engaged. And so how is it that we can, really grow our own transformation, and how is aging a kind of transformation? So this is just a prompt for me to remind me that, I started work on this idea of transformation and worldview shift when I was at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And our team, a multidisciplinary team, really dove in and looked at what the masters were telling us. We did in-depth interviews with 60 people from different world traditions. We did surveys of about 2,000 people, comparing what we learned from the masters with the average householder, and we created a model. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how this model informs this conversation around aging. Let's see. And I'm going to come back to those little loops that I put up there. So Mary Oliver, what do you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And I think this is a beautiful question. As people are looking for meaning, they're looking for purpose, and they're looking at how they are going to perform in this third act. How is it that we are both the conductors and the musicians? How is it that we are engaged in some of these principles that Jeffrey was talking about? And actually a question I have, maybe at the end we could look at whether there's any correlation with aging in terms of these experiences that Jeffrey is describing. So there is this idea that we are all seeped in backgrounds of transpersonal, humanistic, positive psychology, and there is this growing move to revision the worldview on aging. And how do we bring these ideas from transpersonal theory, humanistic theory, positive psychology, the various practices, the move from aging to saging, and even this idea that, there is a revolution as we look at a blue wave. And so how is it that we can yield insight from these various traditions to inform our current situation? So what I did is to take the transformation model and apply it to aging, and really thinking about it in the context of what I call the Grateful Aging Program. And I'm going to take us through these various steps in how we can each begin to chart our own course. And as Ken Dykewald, who is a prominent person in geriatrics today, and who is also very interested in transpersonal, he studied with Erickson and has really, reaped the benefit of Maslow's work. He really talks about how, we really do need to engage in a developmental process where we have some maps that will help us to understand, not that every person is going to move in the same way, but this is my attempt to formulate a map. So the first step is really shifting the worldview on aging and recognizing that these ideas of worldview inform every aspect of our life. They inform how we view ourselves, how we view others, what we find motivating and inspiring. And yet what we know about worldview is that it's largely unconscious and that it lies below the threshold of our awareness. And so it's not easy to begin to think about how we can reformulate something that isn't part of our conscious awareness. There's a wonderful book by Daniel Kahneman who talks about stage 1 and stage 2 as how we operate. And stage 1 is really the unconscious part of us. And it is the driver for most of our decisions, most of our perceptions. And that is that unconscious place. And it is confounded by many biases. So we're not really making informed decisions. And it's only when we move into that stage 2 where we come into that prefrontal cortex and we can begin to think about why I'm making the decisions I'm making, why I'm formulating my opinions, why I hold these stereotypes and judgments against other people. But what we know about the stage 2 brain is it's lazy. It doesn't really like to do all the hard work that it takes for us to reformulate our worldview. And so we are mostly driven on autopilot. Step 2 is really this idea of curiosity and a growth mindset. And we know that we're never too old to get a new dream. And yet, again, going back to the dominant worldview, we knew for many years that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And yet what we've learned as part of neuroplasticity and the changes that are coming forward in terms of developmental psychology, that we learn all the way through life and that we can begin to bring about this kind of growth mindset that as Peter Fenwick said, practice curiosity. And that's true for every stage that we're going through. Some of these pictures got a little distorted. Sorry about that. Step 3 is really creating a transformative aging practice. And so this is just like any kind of skill set that we're trying to move into, that it helps us to practice and to rehearse and to repeat. And so that is going to be part of, oops, sorry about that. So that leads us into what are the elements of a transformative practice. So in the larger transformative study that I did when I was at IONS with Cassie Beaton and Tina Amarick and others, we looked at what are the qualities of a transformative practice across traditions. And we identified a number of factors. And the first was setting intention. And yet we all know that the road to hell can be paved with good intentions. And so how is it that we can become more aware, more mindful of our intentions? And how is it that we can harness that motivation that will inspire us to take action? So it's one thing to formulate that goal or that wish that takes us towards some outcome or objective. It's another thing entirely to formulate the actions that it takes for us to get there. So the second piece is about paying attention. And what we noticed from the wisdom traditions and the different cultural approaches to transformation is they all involve some shift in attention. So we can think about mindfulness. We can think about all the ways in which going back to this stage 1 and stage 2 type of decision processing, these biases completely overpower our capacities to see. And I don't expect you to be able to read this, but it is an example of the fact that we have over 100 different kinds of cognitive biases that impact our ability to see what is so. So going back to this idea of attention, is the glass half empty or the glass half full? Are we able to begin to harness that stage 2 brain in a way that allows us to reflect on and question the assumptions that we're making, and where are we placing our attention? So one of the famous biases is inattentional blindness. We know, as people informed in and shaped by our culture and our worldview experiences, that we have this ability to focus our attention on certain aspects, things we anticipate seeing. So Leslie was talking about his work in the Amazon now, and I had the privilege of spending time with the Achuar in the Ecuadorian Amazon, and I was with a friend who is now deceased, I'm sorry to say, but he was leading us through the forest. And we were a group of gringos who had come from the north, and he became really excited and he started pointing up at the treetops. And it was like, well, we're in the rainforest, Walter. Why are you so excited about this? And it was howler monkeys jumping from branch to branch in the treetops. And we had been trained to associate food with grocery stores. He associated food and survival with, the living world in the forest. And so that was an example for me of how he had an awareness and a trained attention to things that had a survival component for him. And also that we were trained to not attend to that. So, the famous little video of the gorilla in the middle of a basketball game, and I'm sure you've all seen it. If you haven't, look it up. But, if we are focused, we only see what we want to see. So how can we begin to shift our attention in the context of aging to the possibilities, to the gifts that come? And actually, one of the things that I wanted to ask Jeffrey in terms of his research is this idea of wisdom. And I think also when Leslie and Stanley were talking, we do have these different capacities in our brains, and we have a dominance of one or the other. But there are these people who have this sort of integrated corpus callosum. And so they're able to synthesize, the left brain, right brain in ways that can lead to different kinds of insights. And one of the things we see about aging is the cultivation and the development of wisdom. So wisdom comes when we are able to be less polarizing. I think one of the early presentations by Anthony was, informative in that we can really begin to think about how it is that we can be less polarizing. And I think the wisdom brain is something that offers us that gift. The step 6 is creating new habits. So just like you go to a gym and you work out a new muscle group, the same comes when we look at transformative habits, practices, behaviors. And how is it that instead of going to that default place, we can cultivate the growth mindset and we can begin to think about our worldview as something that has the potential to expand. And that, going back to this idea of, our hardwiring, when we think about our brains and, the ways in which we're structured, and those habits happen over time. I grew up in Michigan, and I remember my first driving experience. I was with my dad, and my tires got caught in the grooves of the snow. And I ended up sideswiping the paper boy's mother's car. And, so I sometimes think about our brains like those grooves in the snow, and it's very hard, particularly if you lack the confidence or the experience, to get yourself out of those grooves. And so this notion of neuroplasticity and our ability to rewire those habits becomes really important as we go through this developmental phase of aging. So there's also this idea of, I think I'm missing a slide. I'm missing a slide. So there's another step here that is about guidance. And, the great masters, all but one of them actually talked about the importance of a teacher, talked about how they did not have the skills that they needed. And so they had somebody they trusted who could help them calibrate along the path. And I think this is one of the great gifts of the aging process and of us shifting our worldview, is that we can find guidance from those people who are the star performers, who have lived and really self-actualized and further self-transcended. So that movement of this ego identification that the transpersonalists talk about, really to going beyond that, going to our sense of connection to something greater. And then this idea of acceptance. And again, I'm reminded of Peter's presentation. One of the big issues is that, growing old comes with some suffering, and it comes with that knowledge that death will be there. And so having those kind of mortality salience prompts that remind us, that allow us to live into the gift of our own embodiment and ultimately the potential transition beyond that. This comes from the Upanishads. From the unreal, lead me to the real. From darkness, lead me to light. From death, lead me to immortality. And as we begin to embrace these kinds of understandings, the death process becomes a transformative journey, and we can begin to live our lives more fully, more deeply. And then ultimately this idea of engaging the world. And in that original diagram that I showed, we have this kind of fractal ability to engage in transformation. I would say it's not linear. I totally support what Jeffrey was saying about, trying to avoid steps, but here I have steps. So it allows us to navigate, this language that we have. But how do we recognize that we are in a process of revolution, that the aging population is increasing, demographically, but also in terms of economics? They are a principal driver of our changing economy. And that there is what Dykewald calls this gerontocracy, where as people begin to own their power, own their engagement in the world, we can begin to see this kind of constituency as a vital agency for change. So next steps for my own process at Sophia, I'm teaching this quarter on developmental psychology, focusing on this final third act. Maybe there's a fourth act. I am leading a certificate program at the Alif Trust in England. And then in terms of research, we have a couple of projects that involve immersion experiences. We are right now, same with Jeffrey, we had to close down our lab. So I have created pop-up psychomantium experiences. So I have people creating little chambers in their homes. And then we have all the before and after measures to look at how this can help us to deal with grief and transformation. We're also very interested in virtual reality. And this is something that right now, because we had the lab, our VR setup is tethered to our computer. So I'm really looking at how we can do the pop-up approach for the VR as well. So anybody who's got VR skills and chops and is interested in collaboration, I'd be delighted. I'm also working with Ellen Langer, who has done some just mind-blowing research over the years, and in particular, her classic study on counterclockwise aging. So looking at reverse aging. And again, we're hoping to establish an immersive experience where people go in and experience themselves 20 years earlier, and then looking at physical and psychological changes. So that's it for me. I thank you very much. And this is just my new view as I live in the Tehachapi Mountains of Southern California. And it is a beautiful opportunity to invite curiosity. So thank you all.